This happened when I was 10 years old. I was at a ski resort with my dad, stepmom, and 3 sisters. When this happened, my 2 sisters' dad and stepmom were still out skiing, but me and my sister Ava got cold, so we went back to the hotel to get some food. We sat at the restaurant in the hotel until my stepmom came down. We asked her if she could hold the table so we could go up to the room quickly to drop off our ski jackets. So we take the elevator, and once we get off, we start to walk to our room. That's when I hear someone behind me go, "Hey." Keep in mind, we were both about 11 at the time, so I didn't think he was talking to us. We walked into our room, but before we could close the door, the man steps in the doorway. He was tall, probably about 6 feet, and looked pretty old, maybe about in his early 60s or late 50s, and he was wearing the hotel staff uniform but without the logos. The thing that raised a big red flag was that he was wearing black surgical gloves. He says, "Hey, I was talking to you." We spin around, caught off guard. Ava says, "Us?" He goes, "Yeah, you. I was wondering if you could grab a pitcher for me and come into my room to pour some water for me." Our parents always told us never to trust strangers, and we already got a bad vibe from him, so we politely declined. His tone then got a bit annoyed, and he said, "It will just take a second. Can you please just pour me some water in my room?" At this point, we already knew this wasn't right, so we said no again. This conversation went back and forth for about 3 minutes, until he tried to walk into our room. My instincts kicked in at this point, and I ran towards the door and said, "Sir, we are good," and I slammed the door on him. Ava and I sat in the hotel room for about 10 minutes, panicking on how we were going to leave to talk to our parents, because we had left our phones downstairs. We looked out of the peephole and he was gone, so we bolted down the hallway and ran back down the stairs to the restaurant. Once we told our stepmom, she was mortified and went to office security. They interviewed us and asked for his description because they didn't have any cameras in the hallway. We gave them the description, and they told us that nobody with that description worked there, and that most of them were young, broke college students. At this point, it really set in that if I had accepted and just helped him, I might have died. So everyone teach your kids stranger danger and creepy hotel guy, let's not meet again. Since a young age, I've always had an affinity towards the paranormal, abandoned buildings, and places that have a grim history. Once I reached college, I started to find and explore these creepy places in hopes to see, feel, or hear something as I had seen in all the books and shows I consumed at a young age. In all of my exploring, nothing was creepier than my experience at the New York Farm Colony in Staten Island during the fall of 2021. For some background about the colony, it was established by the Dutch in the 1600s, but in modern times, it primarily served as a commune for elders and low-income people. But all went to hell when serial killer Andre Rand embodied the urban legend of Corsi. He was responsible for a string of child murders and alleged SA in the 1970s and 1980s, and set up his camp in the tunnels under the colony. Since the 80s, parts of the colony have been rebuilt, but a portion of the old buildings from the 19th and early 20th century still remain. This was not my first time exploring the colony. It was my second or third. My friends and I got there in the later hours of the afternoon on a brisk, cloudy November day. We were walking around exploring some buildings we had visited before admiring all of the graffiti while leaving our own pieces of art as well. We had also brought up Ouija board. Despite it being abandoned and parts of it being surrounded by residential areas, the entire property had an extremely daunting aura. As the sun was setting, we found another building none of us had ever seen before. even my friend who had been to the location 5 or 6 times prior. This building had its own fence with a thick wall ivy woven into the chain link fence and barbed wire. It was the only building that had a fence in an already fenced-off property. Just to the side of the fence was an opening. All of the windows were concrete shut, except for one. As we approach the shattered window, we find a baby doll on the windowsill. It was stripped, head half missing from the top, and seemed as if it had been kicked around in the dirt. On its torso, someone had written, "The fun begins now," with 832 written on both of its legs. The skeptic in me assumed it was left there by some edgy kids who hoped to spook whoever stumbled across it. But the child in me hoped this was a sign that something was about to go down. We vaulted through the window to land in a small, dark room with some old chairs and rotted papers scattered everywhere. The building seemed to be an old warehouse of sorts. The room we were standing in after exiting the small room was long and had one door to our left and another door parallel to us. Before we sat down and set up the Ouija board, I proposed walking through all the rooms to ensure there were no squatters. We walked through the rooms only to find old industrial machinery that was rusted beyond movement. Also, the entire complex had no running electricity. After we all agreed that it was empty, we set up the Ouija board in the main room and started asking questions. In the group of 4, I was the last to ask questions. My 3 friends asked general questions to be met with no response. When it was my turn, I asked, "If anyone is here, please give us a sign or make some noise." We sat in silence for a few moments until the warehouse bellowed with an ear-piercing alarm sound. The alarm abruptly cut off and was followed by a loud voice that said, "Alert! Alert! Alert! This is the police. You must leave now. Your life is in danger." We all sat in absolute shock, trying to comprehend what we just heard. My friend proposed it could have been a police incident in the neighborhood right outside the old compound, but I was certain it came from inside the building. More specifically, it sounded like it came from the room we had just left. We hightailed it out of there. Once we were back outside, we walked around the building to see if we were close to the residential neighborhood. We weren't. All we saw was dense forest, and if it truly was the police, we would have seen and heard lights and people. We hurriedly got to the car, constantly looking over our shoulder to make sure we were not being followed. After we got to the car, we sat there in pure shock for a few minutes before heading home. I returned to the colony and exact building some months later, but it was completely empty. At the writing of this, in January of 2024, I've not returned there since. I know for a fact that someone or something else was with us there that day. Whether it was a squatter or something beyond our comprehension, the energy on that property and in that building specifically is sinister to say the least. I grew up in a small Southern California town known for its orange groves from days gone by. All those groves have been replaced by housing developments and shopping centers now, but there were still quite a few around when I was growing up in the 90s. My friend Johnny and I used to get into all kinds of trouble back then. We were just general miscreants. But there was one time I truly believe we almost became victims of a child predator. If anyone reading this also grew up in the 90s, you know that it was a different era. We'd be out all times of the day, and our parents would have no idea where we were. There were lots of kidnappings back then. I can remember multiple times that I was offered candy or asked by some creep to help him find his cat. I always said I'd go check with my mom, and by the time she'd get outside ready to whoop some donkey, he'd be gone. So anyway, Johnny and I were up to no good one day after school. We were traipsing around this orange grove that bordered his street. we started pulling these little metal dam things off the irrigation channels and tossing them wantonly. All of a sudden, we heard a sharp whistle. We both looked up to see a man about 25 feet away from us, wagging his finger and going, "Ah, ah, ah." But his reaction was not at all proportional to the property damage we were causing. He clearly didn't own or work in the grove, because instead of screaming at us to stop, he had a grin from ear to ear. I can still see his face in my mind all these years later. It still gives me chills. Johnny and I stood there for a second watching this guy. Then we looked at each other and Johnny looked back toward the guy and shouted, "Run!" I look over and the guy is in an all-out sprint toward us. Despite the physical exertion he was putting into his sprint, the grin was still there. Johnny and I ran harder and faster than we ever had before. We made it out of the grove and back to his house before noticing the guy wasn't behind us anymore. However, we quickly forgot about it because Johnny's family had just gotten a Nintendo 64 and we started playing Mario. I can't remember if it was the next day or week, but sometime after this happened, we were with his mom getting donuts, and we saw a wanted poster with a sketch of a man that looked awfully similar to the guy who chased us. The man was wanted for trying to kidnap a boy outside of a school. Johnny and I looked at each other and seemingly telepathically agreed to never say a word. I don't know why we never spoke up. Maybe because we were at that age where we'd be bullied by homophobes, because of the possibility that the man had done you-know-what to us. But we never did speak of it again. As I'm typing this, I'm considering reaching out to him to see if he remembers, and if it aligns with my memory of the incident. There were so many different things that happened in my childhood in the 90s that could have easily ended with me dead. Somehow I'm still here, and I have my own family now. I trust no one because of incidents like this. To the dude who may have been a child rapist that chased me and Johnny in the orange grove that day, let's not meet again. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and if you have any stories of your own that you'd like to share on the channel, be sure to email me at whitewarthog@gmail.com. Link in